All right, welcome to our Wednesday Parsha class, and excited today to touch on a topic in this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, we move into the laws of Torah, Mishpatim. So last week we learned about the gift of Torah, the giving of Torah to the Jewish people, and this Parsha is full of laws. And actually, it's one Parsha we get to do that because then we move on next week to the Torah portion, which focuses on the building of the tabernacle. So we have one parsha, and then we only later, in the middle of Vayikra, in the middle of Leviticus, do we get back to a Torah portion which focuses on laws. First we get to the sacrifices. So really we have something to enjoy this week. All of Torah is enjoyable, but we won't have a similar parsha with relevant laws like this for another couple of months after this. So let's focus on one area of the Parsha, the Torah portion of Mishpatim, and we're going to focus on the laws of damages. If someone harms someone else, what type of requirements are there as far as payment is concerned? So the Parsha, the section, if you want to follow the Chumash, it's chapter 21, verse number 22. I apologize. I'm sorry. No, go back a little bit. Chapter 21, verse number 18. Different examples in the Torah portion this week about damages, but this one is about, this one is chapter 21, verse number 18. We'll read through it, and then we will focus on the last two words. We're going to read verses 18 and 19, and then really focus just on the last two words of verse number 19, which, as we're going to see, conveys some very profound ideas. So, chapter 21, verse number 18. V'chiyirivun anashim. When people will fight with one another. V'hika ish esre'ehu, and one person harms another person. They get into a fight, and one person hurts the other. Be'even, with a stone, or be'egraf, with another weapon, v'lo yamus, and the one who is injured does not die, but the nafal lemishkav, but he does fall into bed rest. In other words, he's injured to the degree, excuse me, he's injured to the degree that he is now is bedridden. So he's bedridden. So now, what is the obligation of the assailant, the one who caused the injury? Says verse number 19, how much is a person, what type of payment has to be made? Im yakum v'ishalak b'chutz, if he stands up from his injury, and is able to walk around outside, al mishantoy, he's able to move around with his strength, as Rashi says, al mishantoy, with his strength and with his health. Then v'nika hamaka, and the illness or the injury is healed. Rak shivto yite, you have to pay the sheves. And here you have the Torah telling us one of the payments which have to be made for an injury is called sheves. Potentially, if one harms another person, there are as many as 5 different payments that have to be made. It's not five payments, it's up to 5 different payments for 5 different areas of harm that was done. There is the injury, there is the loss of work, and right today I want to focus on a couple of them. Shiftai is loss of work. Sheves, like Shabbat, right? Shabbat means the day you rest. Unfortunately, you've caused this person to have a lot of Shabbat. You've caused him to not be able to work for a long time. So you have to pay for the lack of work. So that's Sheves. That is one of the categories of payment that have to be made. That has to be done. V'rapa yirape, as well as you have to pay for his healing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. V'rapa yirape, you have to pay for this person's healing. Says the Talmud, V'rapa yirape, and we'll delve into this. V'rapa yirape mikan, from here we see that permission is granted to the doctor to heal. In other words, if not for, there exists till today, there exists people who do not, out of faith, will not go to a doctor, because the argument is, and it's a logical argument, the argument is, if God caused this illness, or if God wants me to be healed, then God will heal me. And if God does not want me to be healed, then then God won't heal me. And it's hard to argue against the merits of that argument. It seems to be an act of great faith to say, I'm not going to a human being to heal me. I place my trust entirely in God. Now, if you think about it, every single day in the davening, one of the blessings we make is Rifa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafi. Heal me, God, and I shall be healed. And grant a complete healing for all of my limbs and all injuries. In that blessing, maybe the sixth blessing of the Shemona Esrei, I'm not sure. In that blessing, there's no mention of a doctor. There's no mention of medicine. We turn to God and we say to God, heal me from my illnesses, from my injuries. So again, if you were to simply read the Shemona Esrei, or for that matter, if you were to read through the Torah book, the book of Torah, there would seem to be room to suggest that it is of great faith to say, I'm not going to go to a doctor. I'll just turn to God and God will heal me. Says the Talmud, that's not correct. Because the Pasuk says over here, V'rapo yirape, that part of the obligations of the assailant, part of the obligations of the one who caused the injury, is that you have to pay for the doctor's bill. So therefore, the Torah itself is telling you that mikan shenitin rishus, a very interesting wording in the Talmud. From here you see permission is granted to the doctor to heal. That God gives permission to the doctor to heal the ailments. And this is why being a doctor is such a common Jewish profession. You know, they say the joke about the doctor and the lawyer were sitting next to one another in shul on Shabbos, and the doctor leans over to the lawyer and says, "This is very annoying." He says, "It seems everyone comes to shul on Shabbos, and they think that Shabbos is the day to get free medical guidance. During the week, if they want to talk to me, they have to make an appointment, they have to pay. But on Shabbos, it's Shabbos. You come to the doctor in shul and you get whatever help you need, and no one could charge you for it because it's Shabbos." So he's complaining to the lawyer about this. And the lawyer says to the doctor, he says, "I too used to have the same problem. People felt the same way, that on Shabbos you can come to the lawyer for free legal advice. Throughout the week, you got to pay $500 an hour. But on Shabbos, it's Shabbos, so you get free advice." He says, "Well, what I started doing was that at the end of that after Shabbos, I remembered who came to me for advice, and then I'd send them a bill in the mail. And nobody asked me for advice anymore." So the doctor says, "That's a great idea. I'll try the same thing." Sure enough, on Tuesday, the doctor opens the mail, and there's a bill from the lawyer for the advice he gave him on Shabbos. Anyway, the point is that the Torah says from the words "v'rapo yirape," this is the source that a doctor is given permission to heal, and therefore the philosophy of I don't turn to a doctor, instead I will turn to God for healing, is not a righteous approach. But let's take a little bit of a deeper look into this topic. What does the Torah say about doctors? Is there ever a situation in which one should not go to a doctor? Furthermore, why does it say "v'rapo yirape"? Why the double terminology? Whenever Torah uses a double terminology, it's intentional. So, in other words, it could have just simply said "v'rapo," and he has to pay for the healing. The fact is, "v'rapo yirape" double terminology is a bit strange. Why the double terminology? So, allow me to share from the commentary some of this topic. It's a broad topic, the topic of the Jewish perspective on doctors and on healing, but we'll share a few of the texts on this discussion. So, firstly, and then maybe we'll even get to a few moments, we'll talk about some of the famous Jewish sages who were also doctors. Who are some of the famous sages who were also doctors? We'll get to that a little later on. So, there is a curious statement. So again, the Gemara which I quoted is Gemara Brachos, Daf Samach Amud Aleph 68. That's where Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael is the one who taught V'rapo Yirape, the words V'rapo Yirape, healing shall be healed. Mikan Shenitnu Reshus L'Refa L'Rapes. This tells us that there's permission given to the healer to heal. However, we come across some interesting commentary over here. Even if they're not necessarily the accepted approach, it's worth sharing. One of the unique approaches to this topic is given by the Ibn Ezra, great sage Ibn Ezra, one of the classic commentaries in the Torah. And he says, Verapo Yirape. He says the healing that this pasuk is referring to a very specific situation. The situation here is that we're talking about an injury, which is a external injury. In other words, someone hit someone, and they are injured from the outside. You could see that there's a bruise, there's a broken bone. Says that Ibn Ezra that permission is only granted for the doctor or to go to the doctor for what he says are external injuries. But an injury which is on the inside, biyad Hashem l'rfoisa, that is up to God to heal. So the Ibn Ezra makes this unique observation, and it distinguishes between an external injury and an internal injury. An external injury, go to the doctor for. An internal injury, says the Ibn Ezra, no, for that you should only speak to, you should only turn to to Hashem for healing. Now, despite the fact that the Ibn Ezra says that is not the accepted approach, as is brought down. There's accepted approach is that you can go to a doctor for an external injury and for an internal injury, and there's even Torah sources. There's even sources in the Talmud which seem to say that, because there's a tractate Nidarim, in tractate Nidarim, that talks about a unique, it's called a Beitza Turmita, a type of egg that the Talmud over there says, and by the way, the Talmud is full of unique medications for illnesses. There's a whole section of the Talmud which talks about ancient medications. Most of the commentaries say they are no longer to be put into use nowadays. In other words, one shouldn't say, well, the Talmud says, Tractate Shabbos says that if I boil this grass and combine it with this aged spice for 40 days, it'll heal my illness. Let me try that. The sages say not to try the Talmudic advice for healing. Those don't apply anymore, or we don't really understand it anymore. But either way, the typical understanding is that all the healing agents that the Talmud talks about should no longer be put into practice. By the way, I once heard, somewhat related to this, someone say how quickly the medical system changes and how quickly we learn new things. Someone said that 95% of the process of healing that existed 150 years ago today is debunked. In other words, 95% of the things doctor told you 150 years ago you should do. I mean, we're not talking about placing a bandage or the basic ideas, but like the solutions to major illnesses, 95% of them from 150 years ago are no longer in place today, which just tells you how humble one has to be when it comes to this area of wisdom, that it's constantly changing. And a lot of what today is accepted will probably be rejected, I don't know, in 20 years from now. So there has to be a healthy dose of humility in the area of medicine. But be that as it may, Ibn Ezra says only external injuries. However, the vast majority of poskim say no, that's not the case. And in fact, today one should go to the medical, should pursue medical attention for both external as well as internal injuries. Now, but let's get back to the words Verapo Yirape for a second. So the Torah says, Verapo Yirape, you should go to the doctor to heal. Now, we've expressed how the Torah rejects the notion that healing should be placed in God's hands. Okay, but why not? In other words, what's the problem with the logic of someone who suggests that healing is what's the problem with the logic of someone who suggests that healing should be done by God alone? And the answer, I think, is obvious. The answer is, and this is the Gemara talks about it. The Gemara says about two sages who were confronted by a person, and they saw the person was sick, and the person said to them, so they said to him, "Why don't you go get healing?" And the man said, "Well, because I just trust in God." So they turned to him and they said, "Really?" They said, "That's foolish." And then they asked him, "What's your profession?" And he said, "I'm a farmer." They said, "Really? So how does farming work?" He said, "Well, I have to till the field, and then I have to plow, and then I have to sow the seeds, etc." So they said, "Why do you have to do that? If God wants your field to produce, then let God cause it to produce." So he answered, "Oh, well, God needs I need to put in my work, and then God will allow the field to produce." So they said, "Exactly. That's how healing works as well." Healing works is that that the doctor is the expert farmer who's able to prepare the field for then the healing to come from God, which tells you the Jewish approach. The Jewish approach is that we recognize that God gave us the tools to assist with the healing, but we should always, just as important as it is to be able to turn to God for healing, it is equally important to turn to the doctor for healing. It is equally important to be able to recognize that the actual gift of healing comes from Hashem, and the doctor is an agent. So you have to have both senses, the sense that, yes, we turn to the doctor. On the other hand, we also have to have the constant awareness that true healing comes from Hashem. Okay. We had this, some of you may have been there, this past Shabbos, we had a fantastic guest speaker here. His name is Chaplain Eli Estrin. And one of the presentations he made was about his son. And his son, he was born, it was then in Seattle. And he said, basically, the doctors and the medical system there, the first group that he dealt with, basically did not believe his son would live, and therefore did really, as horrible as it sounds, did everything in their power to ensure that their son would not live. Because they didn't believe in it, they didn't believe that that possibility existed. Therefore, one step after the other, they basically placed blockades against this child surviving. And it was only when he realized that he was shocked at some point when he realized it hit him. It hit him that the medical system that I'm dealing with wants my child to die because they don't believe he could survive, and therefore he had to shift to a different medical system. He found the right doctors and the right system which believed in the ability of his son to live. And as soon as he moved to that system, everything changed. Suddenly there was the surgery which was necessary, and the care was in place. Until then, they had just been telling him about hospice care, hospice care, hospice care. That's all they were guiding him, because they didn't believe. If we don't believe we can heal this child will not be healed. And his point, and he quoted this Gemara, is that the wording of the Talmud is mikan shenitin reshus leroife lerapos. The permission is given to the doctor to heal. But as the Rebbe often points out, permission is not given to the doctor to predict death, simply to heal. So sometimes the doctor can, sometimes they cannot. But the permission is only given to heal. And again, his story highlighted this in the most profound way. His son, by the way, now is 10 years old, he's somewhat handicapped, bound to a wheelchair, but otherwise he's in school, he's doing well, he's happy, he's joyous. So the permission is given to heal. And again, when the medical system or the doctors or the nurses are able to heal, it's with the blessing of Hashem. And it's that combination that a person has to have in mind when confronting illness. A few more details about this pasuk. So again, those who joined maybe a little bit later, we're chapter 21, verse number 19, where it talks about the healing. And the context of the pasuk is that the person who caused the injury has to pay the medical bills. So the Gemara over here, he brings down the quotes I'm sure sharing from the Moshav Zakanim. Moshav Zakanim is a collection of wisdom from the Tosafist, who lived for the Rishonim, lived 800-900 years ago, in their commentary on the Torah. So the first point over here is that you have to pay. One should not say I simply trust in God, rely on God, but rather one has to use whatever tools we have: the medical system, medicine. Excuse me 1 second. The medical system. So therefore, these are all this is all what the Talmud tells us you have to do. What about, says the Moshe Zakanim, what if the one who caused the injury is themselves a doctor? So we're not talking about a malpractice. We're talking about someone who hit someone, like the pasuk says. He hit someone, and then the guy comes back and says, "Wait a second. The Torah says you have to pay for my medical expenses." Says the guy, "I don't have to pay for your medical expenses. I'm a doctor. I could heal you." Says the Moshe Zakanim, the victim has the right to say, "No, I'm not letting you heal me. You hurt me. And therefore, you have to pay for another doctor. You have to pay for another doctor to heal me because I don't trust you, because you are the one who caused the injury in the first place. And therefore, the Torah obligation is for you to pay for another doctor to heal me." Another idea, by the way, that the Talmud points out, in the words we asked earlier, why does the Torah say virapo yirape, a double terminology? Why not simply virapo? Why virapo yirape? So different answers are given. One answer is given, apologize, second. One answer that is given is because what if I go to one doctor and the doctor can't heal me? So maybe I should say, even though if a person has great faith, so far we said it, even if you have faith, you should still go to the doctor. Don't say God will heal me, because God works through the agent, and the agent happens to be the doctor. So the question is, what about a situation where I went to one doctor and that doctor said, I can't help you? So maybe once I go to a doctor who says I can't help me, at that point I should say, okay, clearly God doesn't want me to be helped through the medical system, because I went to one of God's agents and that doctor said, I can't help you. Says the pasuk, v'rapo yirape, double healing. If you don't go to one doctor, if the first doctor can help you, go to another doctor, because maybe the agent is not that first doctor, maybe it's a second doctor. And therefore, the double terminology is to say, not only should you go to the medical help, but even if the first one can't help you, don't conclude that God doesn't want me to be saved with the medical system. No, continue to go to till you find the proper agent of Hashem. And again, the story of this man, this rabbi who was here, this Shabbos, is a perfect example of that. The first person he went to for assistance ended up not only not being an assistance, but ended up being a true obstacle in the way of health. And it was only the second person or the second group that became the source of the salvation that he was looking for. Now, here's another interesting question that Talmud gets into, and that is, how can a doctor take money for their help? There is a klal, there is a rule in Torah, a rule that the Talmud tells us, and that is that really, not only ideally, one is not allowed to take payment for a mitzvah. A mitzvah that a person does, you should not be paid to do a mitzvah. Now, this raises a lot of questions. How could a rabbi take payment? How could the one reading from the Torah on Shabbos take payment? How could the one reading a Megillah take payment? So these are all questions which we have to address. But the question over here is a doctor allowed to take payment for their services? And the Talmud says that the reason that this pasuk, v'rapo yirape, not only tells us about the right to go to a doctor, but also the fact that the Torah obligates the assailant to pay. The fact that the Torah obligates the assailant to pay the doctor tells you that a doctor is allowed to take payment. Which raises the question, how can the doctor take payment? After all, it's a mitzvah. The healing of a person is fulfillment of a mitzvah. So then how could the doctor take payment for doing a mitzvah? And the answer is that the Torah gives permission. The fact that the Torah says you should pay the doctor is the Torah saying that the doctor is allowed to take payment. Why is that so? Because the Torah understands. The Torah understands that the only way that the doctor accepting payment is going to be more motivated to heal the patient. And therefore, being that we want, what's most important is that the patient be healed. So therefore, the Torah gives permission for the doctor to accept payment for a mitzvah, which is healing a person, because this will ensure a more likely healing process for a person who needs healing. Okay, so here we've addressed some of the essential questions about how the Torah addresses doctors, but I want to share two more ideas. One is a very curious statement that is brought down in the sages, and I shouldn't say a little bit. There's a quote. I'll get to it in a second. There's a quote in Gemara Kiddushin which says, and I apologize in advance to all doctors here. The Gemara Kiddushin Daf Pei Beis Amud Aleph 82a says, "Toiv sheberoifim legehenim," which means the best of the doctors are destined to hell. That's the simple meaning. Toiv sheberoifim legehenim. So how are we to understand that statement? Now, it's not a halachic statement. It's not for the Torah. It's part of the Gemara. The Gemara often includes all sorts of explosive statements, but nonetheless, it's a pretty painful idea to hear. Tov sheberoifim legehenim, the best of the doctors to Gehenna. Why? So I want to share three answers to this question, three explanations of what this verse, what this statement of the Gemara means. Tov shebarofim legehenim. Again, it's a very offensive statement. It also doesn't make sense. The doctors are there healing people. They're making things better. Why would the best of the doctors be destined for Gehenna? And so we'll share three answers. One answer is that we're talking of, there's two types of doctors. And that is the doctor who has the proper mindset is someone who understands that they are operating in concert with God's blessing. A doctor with the right mindset is someone who has a constant awareness that they are an agent of Hashem. And the healing, and it really says the doctor has like a divine presence because they are God's agent. As long as the doctor understands that they are an agent of God, then their work is holy work, and they're destined, to the contrary, to Gan Eden, because they are a true agent of Hashem, an agent of healing. But unfortunately, what happens often is that, and that's what it says, Toiv shebaroifim, the best. What happens is sometimes a doctor can forget that, especially as they are more successful, as they see successes and they're able to accomplish things. They allow their successes to come to their head. And therefore, unfortunately, it can exist that a doctor can become very arrogant and completely forget the presence of God in their work. And that's the meaning of the Gemara, which says, Tov sheberoifim, those who are the best, those who are good, and therefore they allow their success to go to their head, and they think that life and death is in their hands. They believe that the ability to heal is in their power and their wisdom. That's a recipe destined to Gehenna, because that's a denial of God, that's arrogance, and both of those are areas, are terrible flaws, which lead a person down a path of Gehenna. So the Gemara, yes, the Gemara seems to use a very harsh statement, but it's an important statement, is that a doctor is going to be one way or the other. Either they are an agent of God and they're aware of that, or they are a rejection of God. It's a form of rejection when a doctor thinks and perhaps projects the idea that I am the master of healing and I will be the determination whether you will live or, God forbid, will not live, then that's a rejection of God. In fact, it's a form of idolatry, to forget that God is the healer. Which brings us back to the bracha of Rafa'enu. We say Rafa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafi every day in the davening. We say God is the healer. God is the healer. I may be the agent of healing, but God is the healer. And then one who forgets that, Toiv shebaroifim, it's their success, the Toiv. It's their success which causes them to forget that. That can lead them down a negative path. So that's one explanation to this strange statement of Toiv shebaroifim l'Gehenna. A second explanation of the Toiv shebar of this statement Toiv shebaroifim l'Gehenna is that, okay, this is a little bit of a what we call remez, is that if a doctor forgets the hand of God, connected to the first one, if the doctor forgets the hand of God in their work, so they are forgetting the 18th blessing. The 18th blessing of the Shmoneh Esrei, which is Rafa'enu. If you're forgetting Rafa'enu, that means you only really believe in 17 blessings of the Shmoneh Esrei. The word Tov is the numerical value of 17. All right, so therefore they only have the Tov, they only have the 17, not the 18th blessing, and that's a recipe for disaster. And finally, I'll share a story that I've heard from my father-in-law, whose brother was sick, and he had a doctor who was completely devoted and dedicated to him during his illness in a really profound, beautiful way. And he once shared with my father-in-law, the brother of the patient, that his understanding of the word Tov shebarofim l'Gehenna, which means even the best of the doctors go to Gehenna. How can you say that? He says, no, it's a whole different meaning. The best of the doctors, you want to know what a good doctor is one who actually enters Gehenna with the patient. Doesn't just prescribe a prescription or, walk into the office and then, tell you what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and then leave. No, the best doctor is one who's walking into the hell that the patient is going through. And that's a real doctor. Tov shebarofim is one who goes ligehenim, joins the patient in the pain and the suffering that they're going through. That's the idea of that's the best of the doctors. I'll conclude a comment on who are some of the famous doctors in Jewish history. Who are some of the famous doctors who were also Talmidei Chacham? Who are some of our sages who were also doctors? So for several of them, which the Talmud talks about. The Talmud talks about the several doctors in the Talmud. For example, Shmuel. One of the sages of the Talmud is Shmuel. Shmuel was a doctor. He was the doctor of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Shmuel once said that he knows the healing for every illness in the world with the exception of 3. So Shmuel is one of the great doctors. Rabbi Chanina in the Talmud is a doctor. More recently, if you go to the era of the Rishonim 1,000 years ago, perhaps the most famous Jewish sage that was a doctor, most famous in history, is the Rambam, Maimonides, who was a doctor to the to the king in Egypt. He was called the Sultan of Egypt. He was the doctor. The Rambam wrote 17 books on healing, of which we've lost 16. The only book we still have access to is Pirkei Moshe. So that is which includes 25 different lessons, 25 different mamarim, he calls it, on the wisdom of healing. So that is the Rambam. The Ramban, Nachmanides, was also brilliant and in the field of medicine, and he was a philosopher, knowledgeable in medicine. The Sforno was a third sage who was his name is Rabbi Ovadia Sforno. So he was also a doctor, and as well as the Shiltei Gibarim, who was also Rama Rofe. Interestingly, when you talk about the Rambam's medical work, the Rambam wrote a letter, somewhat of a famous letter, in which he described the stresses of his work as a doctor. The Rambam was not initially a doctor. I mean, he knew the wisdom of medicine, but he was not a practicing doctor because he didn't have to, because he was supported by his brother, David. He had a brother, David, who supported him, allowing him to study and to teach and to write and to become the Torah giant in history that he was. Tragically, his brother died in a shipwreck. And when his brother died in a shipwreck, so now the Rambam had to go and work in order to earn a living. That's when he became a doctor. Notice he always knew the wisdom. Wisdom medicine, the Rambam was someone we called Kavod. The Rambam knew everything. So the Rambam's wisdom of medicine only kicked in. He needed it as a profession, only kicked in after his brother died. And that's when he became the doctor to the Sultan in Egypt. Now, apparently, I've heard, is that his renown was so great that at the same time, the king in England was Richard the Lionheart. And Richard the Lionheart reached out to the Rambam, offering him to bring him to be his personal physician. Be that as it may, the Rambam was a physician to the court in Egypt. And he wrote the following message in a letter to Rav Shimon ibn Tibon. Rav Shimon ibn Tibon was a translator of Torah text. And he wrote, and if I'm not mistaken, the context of the letter was telling Rav Shimon ibn Tibon not to come visit me. Rav Shimon said, I want to come visit you. I want to meet with you. And he said, don't visit me because I'm too busy. I won't give you for time, dangerous journey to see me. And therefore, he said in this letter, and I'll read some of it, with this we'll wrap up the class. He said, I am sitting in Egypt. The king is in Al-Qaira. Where I am and where the king lives, he says there's about 4,000 cubits, a little over a mile, I think. And he says, and the king, and the routine for me is very severe. He says, I have to, at the start of my day, every day I have to go check up on the king. That's how I start my day. And if there's anybody, if there is a weakness or an illness in any one of the king's children or any one of his servants, I can't leave. So I have to spend most of the day in Al-Qaira, where he says where the king and the palace is. And I wake up, he says, Bahashkama, dawn, I'm going towards the king's. And if there's nothing wrong, if I can do a quick checkup, then I only get home still after midday. That's the earliest I'll get home. But if there's anything wrong with the king, then I'm stuck there for many hours. Finally, when I do get home, he says, as I walk into my home or my office, the hallway is lined with people. He says, Jews and Gentiles, waiting for an appointment with me. I'm starting, I haven't eaten yet, I haven't drunk yet. Nonetheless, I have to take care of the people. He says, I get off of the animal I was riding from the palace. I wash my hands, and then I apologize profusely. He says, this is my daily routine. I apologize profusely to all the people waiting for me. and say, do you mind if I just have a little snack? And that's what I do. After a little snack, I go to heal them. And for the rest of the day, I'm writing piscos, I'm writing prescriptions and guiding them on how to heal themselves. And this goes on until nighttime. And sometimes, he says, I swear, it goes on even well into the night. And then finally, when I'm finished, again, my morning started early in the morning, tending to the Sultan. And now the rest of the day I've been dealing with, as soon as I get home, I'm dealing with the patients. Finally, he says, finally, when it's finished, I lay down flat. I can't move. That's how exhausted I am. I am in the tachlis achulsha. I am weakened. I can't even talk. He says, the only time I have where I can engage in anything more spiritual work is on Shabbos. And even Shabbos, the community comes. They want to hear words of Torah, words of wisdom. He says, this is my daily routine. And then he concludes, I only share with you a little bit of how overwhelmed I am, says the Rambam, with my obligations. So you see, the Rambam, who was, again, one of the greatest Torah giants in history, he was overwhelmed with his medical obligations. Nonetheless, he did find time. I guess, I don't know exactly. Maybe most of his writings were written beforehand. I know his commentary on the Mishnah was concluded very early on in his life. But this is the daily routine that the Rambam describes in a letter to a colleague at the time. Be that as it may, I know we share different ideas, but there's no question that V'rapa Yirape, the Torah source in this week's Parsha, which says permission is granted to the doctor to heal. And yes, there's some negative connotation, Tov Shebaraf and Legehenim, but there's a doctor who has a Torah mindset, and I know many who have a Torah faith mindset, in which they see themselves as an agent of God. And not only that, there are doctors who begin every day with their own special prayer to Hashem to guide them and to allow the light and the blessing of healing to come through them. There's a true holiness, there's a true beauty in the ability to act as God's agents in bringing healing to the people of the world. All right, with that we conclude today's class. I look forward to continuing our studies, God willing, next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.